You are listening to the Audio Lantern Podcast.
Hello, welcome to Audio Lantern's 29th episode. My name is Can Saraç.
And my name is Güneş Uyanık.
Today we are joined by a special guest. His name is Mattia Cellotto. He's an Italian...
Hello.
Hello.
Did he just butcher your name? Or...
Did I?
It's no. It's Mattia Cellotto. It's pretty
Okay, good.
close.
Okay, good enough.
He's an Italian sound designer currently working in the UK. And we're going to talk a little bit about sound libraries, how to make sound libraries. He has a lot of experience in this area. So he's going to share with us his thought process, what he learned along the way, and some of his experiences. So welcome, Matteo. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very good. Yourself?
I'm okay. Just surviving. Yeah.
He's working in China right now, and it's like a sweatshop, I think, right now.
Yeah, our industry, like the game industry here, is like so weird. It's like booming like crazy. Like there's so many projects happening all at once. It's so weird. Like it's never been this busy before. But yeah, it's. I feel kind of lucky at the same time. But yeah. Why are we talking so much? I think Mattia should be talking. Yeah. How's the virus situation with you? Like, how are you handling it?
Personally, or at a UK level?
Personally,
way.
probably.
I'll go for the personally because it's an easier answer. I'm quite lucky, to be honest. Like I have a good setup at home because working with libraries and doing game audio full time at the office. I come back home, but I still have a setup. I still have speakers, sound card, microphones if need be. So since we started working from home, for me it was just a matter of sorting out a couple of bits and pieces. But really, sometimes I hardly notice the difference, and then when you realize you're not actually talking face to face with your colleagues, etc., it feels really strange. But you have these weird moments of when it's head down work in Reaper. You go for maybe 3 hours without even noticing that you're not in the office.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe the fact that it's uninterrupted, you do, it gets to the point where you think, wow, at work I don't normally get, to do something for 3 hours without anybody knocking on my door.
Yeah.
And, it has a pros and cons, as in sometimes you go so deep there, you're like, well, maybe I've overdone this thing so much or whatever else. But yeah, it's okay for me, as in I know a lot of people that are struggling a little bit more because of either setup or if you used to have your kid in childcare at the moment, it's kind of to keep your kid in the house, and it's just a matter of like providing instruction as well as everything else. I mean, education as well as everything else. So it must be a little bit tricky. We have 2 people in the audio team that are in that situation. So my life is simpler from that point of view.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I think audio people have been hit like way less harsh than some of the other industries, I think, from what I can see.
Especially game audio.
Yeah.
Film guys are having a bit of a problem right now because most of the shootings are postponed until very later, maybe like even 2021 in some extreme cases. So, but yeah, less so than factory workers and stuff. They've been hit really, really hard with the virus.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of which, we haven't done the little introduction part where you can just introduce yourself and tell us like how did you get started and where are you in your career right now. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, of course. My name is Mattia Cellotto. I'm an Italian sound designer, and I've been working in the UK for about 7 years, I would say. Before that, my attempted career with audio started during university. I started to work in a recording studio in Milan, in Italy, and I would just struggle to get to the end of the day feeling good about the future in general, as in I didn't have a contract, and it just seemed like although I was making progress in the terms of learning from my boss and feeling like I was getting quite a bit of experience, I just didn't feel like I would ever be able to do that as a job. And and feel good about it in a financial sense, perhaps. So after university, a friend of mine that went with me at uni, went to VFS and told me, look, this is really, really good. Just trust me. And after some time, I think there was a scholarship offer, and I managed to get a partial one, and figured I would take the leap of faith. And my girlfriend was very supportive at the time. I don't think that I was really giving that thought that much weight at the time. I just thought, yeah, it'd be cool, but it's almost like I was already looking at the opportunity passing by, knowing that I wouldn't make a single move. And she invited me to think about it in a way that was a bit more, no, just put yourself in the position where you come back and this ends up giving you the job that you always wanted. How silly would it be not to even try? And so from there on, went to VFS, went back to Italy, reconsidered, because in Italy there's really not much of a game audio kind of thing going. And so I positioned myself in the UK because I noticed that the few chances that I was trying to get to go in the industry were coming from the UK, but I was trying to get them from Italy. And it was always strange, even when you made it to the interview stage. A lot of candidates might be able to go to a place physically, and you would just have to either schedule a flight, but you're just putting the HR department of that company in a weird position where they need to be quite sure that it's going to be valuable for you and them. So I think at that time we just thought, let's just move to Scotland because it doesn't cost that much, and it's still close enough for every opportunity that might arise. And so from there on, I ended up managing to join Splash Damage. I worked there for 3 years. Worked on Dirty Bomb, Gears of War Ultimate Edition, and Gears of War 4, mostly multiplayer maps. And now I work at Criterion Games. I worked on, recently, I guess, Fallen Order, although we just helped a little bit just before launch, and a bit of Firestorm for Battlefield 5 and Battlefront 2 before that. So yeah, that's me at the moment. I guess I didn't really speak much about the library side of things, but that started pretty much the second that I moved to Scotland, because when I moved to Scotland, I didn't really have a job, and my girlfriend moved there to study. So I just started taking gigs like Boom Up and all sorts of things, really working on commercials. And I think one day I just had a really good memory of the course of field recording at VFS. Curtis was just very inspiring. I don't know if this is for everyone, but VFS, Vancouver Film School, gives this course, Sound Design for Visual Media. And one of the instructors, Curtis, right? He's the teacher for field recording. And just looking back, I thought that I wanted to do something that had to do with that. And I already had a Fostex FR2 when I was in Scotland. And I think I bought an NTG3 to start doing some boom work. And I figured that because I had that stuff, plus I think it's the R5, if I remember correctly, the Tascam. I just started recording a couple of things. So I think the first thing that I did was just a glue kind of solution and just recorded a lot of slime. And that costed me probably £10. And, maybe I made a total of, in the short, let's say in the short term, it must have made me $100, which were enough to buy enough material to make the second library, which was I think a crunch mode was like a sort of like a very cheap vegetable violence type of library. And from there on, every time that I would make a library, it would just kind of like I would just take X from the how much I made since the last library, and I would just try to invest more in making the new one, so that I would always feel more and more satisfied doing something that involves perhaps traveling to Amsterdam to record walruses or whatever else, just because some things are just not easy to record, and if you don't put the budget there, you're just going to get average results. And so when I joined the game industry, working on sound libraries, I think was actually my foot in the doors, and I got considered mostly because I was recording my own sounds. aside from doing demos of Wise projects as well as trailer sound redesigns. So having that also helped. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. Sorry, that was very lame.
No, that was very good actually.
Yeah, you have a very, very nice career, and like it's really fun to listen to.
Nice.
Yeah.
We'll get started a little bit about like your libraries. I think at the time of this recording, your most recent library that came out is the Metamorphosis, and
yeah.
Maybe you can talk a little bit your experience doing that library. I know it involves some synthesizers with your work with like Serum. Serum is like one of those synthesizers like I'm trying to get into as well. Like I'm watching some tutorials and trying to learn more about it. Maybe you can talk a little bit about like your experience with Serum and how your recordings for Metamorphosis, something like that.
Yeah, Yeah, so, I mean, the library started in a very messy way, to be honest. I was trying to record, I think like 2 years ago during Christmas, I went to Italy and I recorded a couple of fireworks. And I remember that at the time I had the Sanken CO100, and I thought, if you get really close to things like ground spinners, they really pretty much hit the 100Ks, as in, if you're recording at 196, you get the energy up until 92 kilohertz. There's pretty much like there might be more, right?
Yeah.
and since then, I bought a couple more mics that are supposed to go to 200 kilohertz, and just had to figure out for Animal Hyperrealism Volume 2, which is library before Metamorphosis. I found a way to record at 384 kilohertz. So at that point, your maximum frequency would be 192. And I just, every time that I do this kind of thing, I think, well, I've already recorded that material, but I'm just wondering if I was missing out on anything. And, it's not like you're necessarily missing out on that much, but some things, like the 1 in 10 things that you record, end up feeling a lot better.
Right.
If you have that kind of frequency response when you stretch them. So I just wanted to record more fireworks, and that's what I did, I think, the year after, so about a year ago now. And I figured in the UK we have a bit of a strict regulations for use of fireworks. So I wanted to plan a trip to Poland to try and record more. And I was almost finished with the Animal Hyperrealism Volume 2, and I went to Germany to record a few animals. While I was there, I recorded more fireworks. And I just convinced myself, yes, next library is going to be all about fireworks.
Nice.
And for one reason or another, this thing was just not happening. Like every contact that I had in Poland was just not replying, or replying in a very unspecific manner, and you're communicating via videos that you find on YouTube about certain types of fireworks that you think might be cool to record, but manufacturing is not that simple. If something sounds good and is made in the US, it might not be exported to Poland, and you might have a lot of complications trying to get exactly what you want, and ultimately it's just kind of like it just became too complicated. And while I was trying to make that work, I was also doing a lot of experimental recordings with things like brass instruments and other elements that had nothing to do with fireworks. And I found myself about 6 months into the project itself of the library without realizing that I was making a library. But at one point I thought it would be cool if I could take all of these things that really don't have much to do one with another and make a library. Although if I do, I will need some form of glue to make this material valuable. I've recorded a pyro, and that was amazing. I've recorded slingshots firing all sorts of projectiles, and that was also cool. But I couldn't really understand how that would shape in a library that didn't feature too much design material, because normally I tend to make libraries that are quite clean recordings but not heavily processed, or at least I have a designed section, but that is never really more than 20% of the library itself. So at the same time, I was kind of watching a lot of the work that is coming out of Source Sound, and I kept thinking, one of my favorite sounds, I'm sorry, this answer is again super lengthy, but one of my favorite sounds is like the sound that you hear in commercials for an ice cream kind of like being bitten on, like that kind of crunch. And every time you think, if I wanted that crunch, like as much of it as possible, I used to think you would approach it in the sense of recording something that feels crunchy and then pitching whatever else. And the more I listen to material like the one that you're hearing on a daily basis from Source Sound, etc., all sorts of good trailers, or good game projects, like even any kind of trailer for League of Legends, etc. It always feels like when something is really pushed at the point that you really go, wow, that is the best crunch, explosion, whatever else, it always seems to feature at least some form of synthesis. And I think it's because synthesis can give you a form of cleanness that you just are never going to get with microphones. And if you put like 9 inflators one after the other in your chain, or a billion transects cranking whatever you want, you're still going to get a lot of definition out of the sound, and it's not going to turn into mush that easily. At least if you approach it correctly, as in if you manage to keep a synthesizer in line to give you clean results. And so I figured, we're halfway through this project that seems to not make sense at all. Let's just try and use Serum and see what happens. And I don't know, it's been like, I think it was like a week after I started making material for the library, just because it's weirdly easy to pick it up and just start to play with it. And I started making bass drops because I always wanted to make my own, but I didn't know how, because before this library I would record everything that I made. So the closest thing that I ever did was probably to record metal sheets on a subwoofer and kind of modulating a sine wave to make the sheets vibrate in a certain way. But that wasn't really it was just kind of like a side thing. It's not exactly a bass drop, like one of those that are cleaned like a cinematic type of I'm talking about cinematic as in cinematic as in the library, the sound library. Which features some really amazing bass drops, and that's kind of the reference that I had for that. And so, like 1 week after using Serum, it was possible already to do that kind of thing. So I went for all sorts of things that I could make, but without really setting myself up for making them. As in, I would just play with Serum and then follow whatever I thought Serum was telling me I needed to make. That sounds a bit weird, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I was just being quite pseudo-random about the type of content that I was creating with it. And then when I was closing down the library, I must have thrown away about 70% of the material that I made in Serum, just because it was either like I ended up wanting this kind of constant of grit and I don't know, like throaty type of sounds in the library, and a lot of them were just too synthy in a too classic of a way, and I just wanted something that could be misunderstood for a lot of the synthetic material, something that applied to something you could put underneath an organic sound and go, yeah, okay, that's what makes it, I don't know, more bigger than life. I guess. So that's how I ended up making the synthesized part of the library. It was just I had the curiosity of wanting to learn a little bit about synthesis, because I, again, even on my full-time job, I rarely use synths. And I think this is the first synth that I'm really happy playing with, and it's also the first synth that, as I said, I started in a pseudo-random way, but now if I am asked to make an impact or a riser or whatever else, I know how to do that within half a day. Whereas before with synths, it always had to be something like, well, I'll just roll the dice until something happens, and I'll convince myself that that was the thing that I wanted to make, and then I'll look back in a month and think, well, that was not fitting at all. Yeah. That's the closest I could get. So yeah, Serum seems like a really good tool for that for me.
That's awesome.
You've been making libraries for how many years now? About 5, 6?
7, yeah. I think it's 7, but the first ones were very like low profile, I guess. They were not paying for the bills. Not that they do now, because I still have the full-time job, but they're getting closer if need be. But
since you're doing these, when you're choosing what to do, like when you're choosing what to record as a library, how's your thought process? Is it going something like check out a sound effect and see like the popular content and then just choose accordingly, or trying to find something that isn't featured in the libraries and then go on there? Or is it more like, I want to record this, and if people like this, great, kind of process?
I think it's of everything that you mentioned, it's mostly the last option that you said. So when I think about a lot of recordists that I really love the material of, like from the recordists themselves to Watson Wu or Paul, there's so much good material, and sometimes I guess I think that having a full-time job is possibly the best thing for a recordist. At least the way that I see it is, I like to record different things, and more often than not, I'll be watching something, I'll be listening to, I don't know, some podcast or whatever, and I'll hear something that triggers some form of, well, the beginning of an obsession, I guess. And, for the animal librarialism, I think it was wanting to record the best lions, as in just, I've heard quite a lot of libraries featuring lions, and I just wanted to know how it could be done. And aside from roars, I also wanted to see whether it would be possible to get close to lions and record the territorial calls. Because I think while I was making the library, I was following a YouTube channel that shows how wildlife is preserved in Africa. And more often than not, you'll hear these sounds in the background of the videos. And they sound nothing like the type of lion that you're used to, in the sense that when you hear lions normally in movies, they're always growling or roaring, or they're being aggressive. Whereas a territorial call feels a lot more like, I don't know, it's just some weird, it's a weird sound for a lion. And I don't know, I kind of wanted to record one. And so, that started the whole process for the first library. And all of the other animals that I recorded along the way were pretty much, I don't know, it was just a matter of opening up Google Maps and just looking around for animal places, all sorts. I mean, I'm talking from trained animals for media production, like movies or whatever else. I think I recorded a couple of crows that were in Harry Potter, or at least the person training that told me so. But I also went to zoos, and in that case, it's a completely different approach. Like what you get out of these different situations is very, very different, but both in a sense that you work on animals and you have to adapt to whether the animal is trained or not, but also on a macro scale, recording electricity versus animals is a very, very different thing. And I just like the idea of having to put myself in a situation where I kind of have to adapt my knowledge to something new. It's just it's very satisfying. It's not great when you fail, especially if you've invested like £1,000 on a day doing something, but luckily that hasn't happened so far. Normally what happens is every library starts from a comfort zone point of view, from risk reward type of a situation, or maybe it will even start because I will just bring my gear to, I don't know, a hike, and I'll just find a frozen lake, for example, which happened once. It was pseudo-planned, but it was never planned to be a whole library. But if things work out, then a library happens, I guess. So sometimes it's more forced, and other times it's less forced. But I guess I always start with the idea of what do I feel like I need at the moment? And it's good to be in that position, as in it's good to have a full-time job and to look at libraries, approaching them thinking, what am I missing that my full-time job is not giving me? Because, when you do that and you make libraries, it also means being able to expense traveling, etc. So it's just a good opportunity to really be selfish with what you do, in the sense that you can really think, oh, I kind of wanted to visit Amsterdam and there's best walruses that I can record at the moment. How cool would it be if I was able to arrange something like that? And then it happens, and it's just one day, and really you haven't visited Amsterdam, you've just recorded the lions, but you have this weird memory of everything kind of like coming together. I said lions, I meant walruses. I was thinking about sea lions because they ended up being there as well. But yeah, sorry, again, super lengthy, but ultimately I kind of go with whatever I feel like I need to record or want to record, and I take quite long breaks in between libraries so that I don't get overworked or uninspired, which is what I'm doing at the moment. As in, at the moment I'm not recording anything at all. It's just I'm enjoying the post-launch of the latest one, and
Nice.
as usual I say, yeah, that's it. It's too much. It's too much. too intense towards the end, because when it gets to the end, you have the video to edit, you have the audio to edit, you have the metadata and everything, and it just becomes a little bit too much. Like
Right.
I always tell myself 2 hours tops during the day after or before work, and that's as much as I allow myself to work on the library, but not every day because it gets crazy. So when you get to the point where you're almost out, it just escalates into a very I don't know, one needs to be careful keeping it healthy, because it's very easy to say, well, if I do 8 hours today, then I can just publish it, instead of saying, I'll wait 2 weeks and spread those 8 hours or 6 hours over 2 weeks. It's hard to tell yourself what is the right thing to do.
Probably 6 hours in 2 weeks is better for your health, at least.
Yeah. Again, especially because of the full-time job.
Yeah. You talked about recording electricity and recording animals, and they need two different mindsets to record. How does it differentiate in the planning process and recording it? I guess.
I think keeping it very basic in a way is the best thing possible. As in, I'm not saying never create pipelines for all of your work, but if you think about electricity, so you know that you might have electromagnetic interferences, either recording video or audio, but audio equipment tends to be shielded better than video, at least in my experience. So you need to know that you might be asked to keep a safety distance from the object that you're recording, or that your gear itself might need to stay at a distance. And if so, if the person that if the person that is using the equipment allows you to be as close as you want at your own risk in terms of equipment, would you want to split your gear in 2 sets so that you can risk one while the other one captures things in a safer way, and so on and so forth? So when I recorded most of the electricity library, that's kind of what I was thinking about while preparing the session. At the time, and still now, I have my favorite microphones, and I'll try to work them into whichever session. So if I can, I'll just try to make sure that the session happens in conditions where these microphones can do their job, more so than, oh no, I'm just going to buy, 416 just because for this session it happens to be the best microphone. And that's also because I have a bit of a crush on the mics that I own, and I don't know, I just like them, and I don't particularly like renting microphones. So that has been my approach, but it is flawed in a way, in the sense that a lot of times you might end up, for example, I have a couple of MKH 8050s, and indoors they can capture quite a lot of reflections. So sometimes I will have to make up for that behavior with some form of editing and or processing in post. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's a learning curve and it's constant. But generally, I try to use the gear that I have, and I try to find a way to work every bit of it in the sessions. I did borrow for the electricity recording an Electrosluk. I hope that's how it's pronounced, but it's the LOM brand that makes them. Now I own one, but I didn't even know how good of a microphone it was until I tried it. Or better, I'm not even sure whether you call that a microphone. It's just an electromagnetic pickup, I guess. Yeah, it worked out pretty great. I guess the first session that I did with electricity, I didn't realize that if you don't have that kind of pickup, all of your recording is going to sound very, very sharp, tinny, and with not a lot of low end. Whereas if you bring a coil to a recording session for electricity, you're just going to get low end, endless, as in lots of it.
Nice.
So that was good to find out while I was starting to record that library. But then you start to record animals, and the thing is completely different. I had to figure out how to keep on my hand, a single hand on the pistol grip, about 6 microphones, because that's what I wanted. And I mean, it's silly because I didn't have to, but I wanted to. And a lot of libraries, like I started the animal library also partly because I wasn't particularly happy with the types of recordings you get of animals in general. And I think it comes down to the fact that for sound effects in general, people will just, create the effect on the spot. So if you want a car crash, you'll just go to a junkyard, grab with a huge magnet a cube of a car, and then just drop it there, and you'll have 16 tracks. But when you record animals, especially if you want spontaneous behavior, you need to be there. Or I just, while I'm saying this, I'm just remembering that one time I was in a zoo, and I had this setup with a pistol grip and everything, and I was trying to record these howling monkeys, and sometimes they would start and go on for 5 minutes, and other times they would just do it for like 10 seconds. But I would just kind of walk around the zoo, and every time that I heard them in the distance, because they were that loud, I would just start to run with everything kind of like on my shoulders, and it was just really, really funny. But it kind of worked out. So the point being, I guess, is I had to, figure out a way to keep all the microphones on one hand. So the challenges are different, and that's the good thing about it. If I was to list, what worked in which circumstances, that's besides the point. The point is that all of these things require you to think in a different way. But at the same time, if you say, well, I don't want the weight of 6 microphones for recording animals, and I'm just going to use one because it's easier to carry around, that is also mostly how it's been done up until now. So I guess on one end, there's things that you can learn from making various types of libraries that enables you to say, well, that worked for this kind of material, so why not do it for this kind of material? And then on the other side, there's a part about don't just simply apply what you know to the next library, because you need to put yourself in the position where you can learn something new. And I'm not saying start from scratch, but there's a happy medium where you go there and you're quite cautious about what you're doing and try to understand what the best solution is. Like, for example, for recording lions, I had to ship a blimp to a lion trainer, and he spent a lot of time with the lions, kind of getting them used to this object. And when I came to record, it was pretty much as if I wasn't there. It's small things, and it's not things like you need to know audio in depth to think about. Actually, being so fixated about the technicalities might not play well in terms of understanding the big picture of what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah, so it's a bit of everything, but yeah, generally I think having that kind of approach helps.
Yeah, definitely.
Out of all your libraries, you have for animals, you have two libraries released until this date. What kind of knowledge did you use after the release of the first one? Because you recorded a lot of sounds, you did lots of these recordings in the zoos and other places. you worked on editing them and processing them and all that stuff, and then you have all that knowledge and you want to make a second library. What kind of knowledge came into the second one, and like which kind of mistakes did you realize on the way, or which kind of like what did you make better in the second one in your own opinion?
Yeah, the thing that helped the most making the second one was this weird instinct you develop for understanding whether something is going to happen or not going to happen, and taking more days than one to try and make the stars align in a way. As in, if you decide that you want to record, for example, a cow mooing, and you happen to be in the proximities of a farm, but you don't really know their behavior, the time at which they're fed, or whether they behave in a certain way in that season, or really I'm not much of a person that knows these things, I guess. But if you enable yourself, if you allow yourself to be there for 2 to 3 days casually, as in during a holiday where you can afford to waste that time, or invest that time in such a way that if you don't get anything out of it, you're fine with yourself, then it means that you can kind of approach the thing as a walk in the park, and just kind of say to yourself, I'm just going to go to this farm and I'll talk to the owners, try to understand at what time they feed them and whether they make a sound when they're about to get fed, and talk about that, see if it leads anywhere. And most of the time it won't, but sometimes it will, and it's fine. And for most of the part, what I learned is that you cannot just have expectations that are almost selfish in a way, because these are animals and they're just kind of, they are doing their thing, and if they happen to be doing the thing that you like and that you're there for, that's great. But don't just, sometimes you just feel weird about being there and kind of hoping that an animal does something, and you see the animal looking back at you kind of saying, look, I don't know what you want, but I don't think it's going to happen. So just getting kind of like a good sense of that helps. Another thing that helps a lot, and this is sort of like the other side of it, is understanding which animals can be triggered by calls, and how. So, for example, donkeys, horses, birds, a few birds, but not all of them. Even if you have your phone with you, they will most likely reply to a call. It might be a specific call, and it might be due to how the circumstances that are around that animal. As in, for example, I think I was trying to record pony once, and I had all these neat sounds in my phone and would play them one by one, and the animal would just not make any sound at all. And before I even realized what was going on, my phone went to the next compilation of sounds that was for donkeys, and the first sound of a donkey played, and the animal immediately made a sound. And I thought, well, this is strange, because, it's a horse. I don't really understand why the sound of a donkey would trigger it more than the sound of a horse. And then I realized that this horse is literally next to a donkey, like the fence of a donkey, like. And I don't know for how long that animal was there, but it just kind of made sense in hindsight. But I would have never thought of trying that.
Right.
But so calls with your phone can work to an extent, and it needs to be something that can propel the sound enough, but it doesn't need to convince the animals that is real in terms of size and frequency response. Whereas I found with cats, for example, big cats as in lions and tigers, that you need pretty much a car with a stereo kind of just blasting the call in the distance, and at that point they will buy it. And they'll try to answer the calls. Another one that was even weirder was with alligators. I went to this place that had alligators, and the enclosure was made in such a way that it had wooden construction on top on which you would walk, and of course all the protection around it. But the base of this construction had wood planks going in the water, so every step you took on this surface would translate to sounds transmitted from the wood to the water. The trainer that was there, at least the keeper that was there at the time, showed me that he would just kind of rattle his foot on this rugged wooden surface until the animals made a call. And at that point you realize that, differently from, say, for example, donkeys and or birds, the hearing of alligators is different, and they're probably relying on low frequencies a lot more than any other animals. And this then made sense looking at I think it's Colin's work on crocodiles, because he also recorded quite a few and gave me a few tips. But it's kind of, you almost want to provide them with the subsonic cues to trigger them. So I guess overall, what I learned going from the first one to the second one was just this idea of having less expectations, but also having very clear ways of trying to make something happen. And again, this was all for animals that were not trained. When animals were trained, it's just a matter of conversation with a trainer saying, what's the safety distance, and can we do it in such a way that instead of getting 10 calls and exasperating the animal in 10 minutes, we just do whatever you think is far from the animal's maximum amount of calls or whatever else, so that they are completely comfortable and they're not even noticing that we're doing something with the sounds that they're making. And we take plenty of breaks. Before you know it, you just have enough calls that it doesn't make sense to record anymore. As in, sometimes you just get so much material that the variations are just not pointless, but you're getting to the point where you can almost phase cancel 2 calls. So yeah, I think that's what helped going into the second one. Also having a few contacts, of course, in the UK, and I think when I was starting the second one, I had a few ideas that I wanted to kind of squeeze into the first one, but the first one hit a point where I thought, well, I need to wrap this up. I cannot just capture every sound possible for animals and just make a library that is all of the animals in the world. Because at one point I started thinking, well, I have dogs, but I don't have cats, so can I really publish this? I thought, well, I mean, gets to a point where you just have to call it.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to get into the more, I guess, boring parts of a library development, but it's a necessary evil, I think. The metadata management and, the softwares that you use to manage the metadata. Yeah. How do you approach it? Most people use SoundMiner. I haven't checked yours, if you use that too, or something else.
I use Soundly.
Soundly, yeah.
To be honest. Yeah. It's just very straightforward. It's one of the steps that I think I like the least. But the more I think about it, the less it's actually that bad. As in, I used to spend maybe a couple of days making metadata for libraries, and now it's about 2 hours. I just have the Stream Deck, Delgato. I just have one of those, and I have a lot of auto hotkeys scripts to do things like copy the name of the file, which has already been sorted, and then open the description of the metadata, open a Word document, paste the name of the file, remove all of the commas and replace them with spaces, or all sorts of things like those that ultimately kind of cut the time that I spend entering the metadata. So that's what I use. Yeah, so I guess half of it is in Soundly itself, and the other half is in all these scripts that I wrote to work around the fact that that it needs doing, and it's not exactly pleasant to do. But that's the way that I do it.
After your studies in Vancouver Film School, you kind of like jumped straight into game audio. So you were always been like a game audio person, like, because I'm kind of like that too. I kind of knew that I wanted to steer towards game audio.
Yeah.
How would you say your experience with game audio and like, just being a game playing person, the expectations for the game's audio department, how does that knowledge and experience help you with your library making and sound recording experience?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think it's mostly the when you're using SoundMiner or Soundly or whatever else, and you're at work and you're a sound designer at that time, that's what you're doing in the moment, and you're just finding results over, for example, electricity sounds, right? And you think, oh, okay, yeah, I know there's like a couple of really good electricity sounds, but it's a couple, and they're still used like since the 90s, I assume. After a while that you use these, you think, I want to be different, but every time that I try to do something different in post, so try to create the same feeling of those sounds that have been used to death, but in post, so by not using these sounds but by creating something shaped like those in some other way, it sucked. Every time that I tried, it didn't work. So you just kind of like make a note of yourself of why those sound so cool and what it is that makes them, so good, so pleasant to listen to. And then if the opportunity arises, you can kind of keep that in mind when you go recording. I think it's, that kind of thing of, I need to be good enough of a recordist to be my own supplier at work, in the sense that I don't particularly like when you find a sound and it is what you were looking for, but it's also the last resort in Soundly, as in it's either that or nothing. And so you bring it in and you try to like clean up what needs cleaning up and enhance it in however many ways, and more often than not you end up with a result that feels at least a bit incoherent, like something that just kind of feels, you keep looking back and thinking, well, this is not exactly as good as I think it could be, but I'll take that. It's kind of like the best that I can do.
It sounds a bit like stitched in, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like it's that kind of thing of maybe you want the perfect dinosaur sound, but in your library you don't have enough clean material. And animal recordings specifically, if you don't have it to start with, that kind of the details, it's just going to be a mess, because all you can do at that point is editing, but not vertical. Just kind of like, don't layer too much, because if your starting sound is bad, then all you can try to do is create some form of development over time that makes the sound interesting. But the second you layer something, it's just kind of like you're starting with mud.
Yeah.
Whatever you add is going to be mud plus something, and that rarely leads to something that is pleasant sounding. So every time that I have that kind of problem, I try to understand how it could be solved by libraries, or even things like designed sounds that feel amazing, but are overly designed or too recognizable. I don't know if you watch Cinema Sins, but that's just like an example that does it for me. Like the sound that they use there, I think is from like a Boom library. And it's a great sound. And it's amazing if you have a YouTube channel and you need to drop something in, or you're not aware that channel exists and you just want a very impactful stinger for a trailer. That's completely fine. But in some way it triggers me to hear something like that. And going back to libraries like the cinematic one, there's a section that I think it's called pure or simple or something like that, but it's sounds that you can pretty much put underneath any other sound and you will not be able to tell that they're there, as in you will not necessarily hear a character that will tell you, hey, I'm here, I am sample number 58, but the sound that you're getting out of layering that sound with the original one makes everything better.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted, something like that, which in some way is what I was trying to do with the Metamorphosis.
Nice.
So, it definitely helps working in as a sound designer the rest of the time that I'm not doing recordist or that I'm not doing, libraries, because it just tells you what you need. And then when you start recording, you can kind of like monitor with the ears of someone that is going to be critical of your work if something is missing.
Nice.
Yeah. By the way, a little side note, the sound that you said Boom Library sound in Cinema Sins, it is a great sound, and I think it was Boom's Whooshes and Impacts or something like that.
Yeah.
The weird thing is, that is a YouTube channel and it's doing that. We have a channel here called TV8. They're doing these Survivor Turkey and stuff like that. They extensively use like that library, just that library, the whole channel. I mean, you wouldn't believe. I'm like, okay, that's Impact 1, yeah. I know that one. I know that Bush, yep.
Yeah. I think I heard a lot of stuff as well in, what was it? Death Stranding, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not unusual, and it's completely understandable from many points of view. But like for the specific reason why I was mentioning that is just I think I tend to prefer sounds that can kind of fall in the background a bit, or can take a back seat, and just kind of like I like sounds that can be used almost as vitamins to other sounds. Not the EQ, but just kind of like adding something to it without going. And here's this thing that steals the show completely, and
or at least pitch shifted, I guess. Maybe that could help. Speaking of which, you've developed like 8-9 libraries at this point.
Yeah.
One of the impactful things about the libraries is the cover art.
Oh yeah.
How do you go in that? Like, do you do your own cover arts, or do you go to stock photos and stuff?
No. So that's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked, because I don't think the people that worked on those get enough credit. But the first one that I made, that was a decent one. So the first one that I made. So you're talking about like all of my libraries, but really the first 2 had a cover that sucked, and I can tell you that because I made that cover. I have no problem admitting that it did. But I think starting from the Rock's Momentum, which was a library about rock impacts, I was thinking back to making a cover, and I thought I don't really know what to do, because I kind of want something nice, because this library sounds much better than it's going to look if I make the cover myself.
Yeah.
and so I asked an artist who was previously the drummer in a band that I was playing with. How do you say? It was just a matter of. Oh no, sorry. Actually, you already made the art, and it was just a beautiful. It's what you see as the cover for that library. And I just happened to see it on Facebook after I was done recording the library, and I thought, can I use this as the cover? And he said yes. That was great. And for the second one, I think I just pretty much I asked him whether he would be able to make something in the style of that. Said yes again. And then going forward, I think he was just too busy to take the work. His name is Vittorio Sezzella. Yeah, he's really, really good at drawing. I'm not really sure what his full-time job is at the moment. I just know that he makes amazing things. And since then, I've been working with someone else who's able to, I guess, emulate the style. So all of the animal hyperrealism libraries. And Metamorphosis was done by this new artist. His name is Felix. His surname I will try to pronounce just to give the credit, but you'll have to look up in the video credits of the libraries if you want to know who he is. But I think it's Bauerscroll. Okay. And yes, I intentionally muffled the end of the part the surname, because I never heard it pronounced, and I was really afraid of pronouncing it. But I've put myself in that position. So yeah, I don't make my covers. They do, and cool. And that's why they're nice.
What about your the library names? I was just talking to my girlfriend. I was just telling her we're gonna do this podcast with this guy who made a sound library called Animal Hyperrealism, and she was like, immediately, that sounds really interesting. Like she's not a sound designer or anything like that, but like she likes animals, so that made her like immediately interested. Do you come up with your own names for the libraries?
Yeah, but I'm not proud of that.
I'll just interject because we're right now like developing a couple libraries ourselves, and one of the libraries we are doing right now is about drones and scary ambiences and stuff. So we kind of named it Drones and Scary Ambiences. So
I mean, it's clear because you still want something that gives you results on websites like a sound effect. So if you go like bada bing, bada bang for like an explosion library, then it might be tricky. So in a way, you want to be clear, and on the other way, I don't know, have some names that I like, but I'm not really sure what leads to them. I just know that I like the ring that they might have, and
Right.
they're still clear. Like Rock's Momentum has the word rocks in it. Nobody was going to ever search for momentum, I would assume, but maybe if they do, it's because they remember that word from the Rocks library, but I don't know. So it kind of tends to be something like whatever sticks. Although with Metamorphosis, it was really annoying because, you know, animal hyperrealism was just about telling the listener that these animals have been recorded as close as humanly possible. and you know, like whatever you want to do with the sounds that are 192 kilohertz, and you can really do whatever you want, and even like 1/4 speed for most of the recordings, no problem. And that's kind of what I wanted to say with that name. But when it came to Metamorphosis, it was like, I think I want to call it elemental hyperrealism. And then I thought, well, I have fire. In a way, I have air because, you know, I've recorded projectiles flying by, etc. But I don't really have other elements in the sense of, you know, like earth or whatever else. And I thought, okay, it's not really elemental. And then I thought textured hyperrealism. And I thought, I'm starting to feel like I'm really working the word hyperrealism in there just so that people can associate it to the previous libraries. And I thought, I didn't do it before, and I really don't want to have to put a word in every library that I make since, just to make people identify that is a thing that I made. So at one point I was like, you know what, just I'll keep thinking about it the same way that I would if this library made a penny. And so, you know, like it just helps to think about it that way after a while. But yes, it's that's a thought process. It's not fun.
Speaking of pennies, how do you go about pricing your libraries? Because that is kind of an issue too for people developing libraries. Just what to put the price.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I started, I think the first library that I made was either $9 or $11, if I remember correctly, and the second one too. And then they became like, I think 32, maybe 60 or 70 or something like that. And the new ones are quite expensive, to be honest. The way that I go about pricing them is pretty much a mix of how much money am I going to invest making this library and how much of a fall can I take not selling a single copy, just for the sake of being able to finish the library and feeling good about myself, even if it doesn't sell a single copy. I still want to price it in such a way that I know that at least 10 copies will go, but after that, really, it's hard to tell how popular a library will be. But in the case, for example, I made what was it called, like ultrasonic dry ice, and that library did not do well, like at all, and it was not pleasant to work with, as in it's all material that is like super harsh. At one point I thought, oh, nobody has ever done this with ultrasonic microphones, and I do think there's a value in it, but somehow, for some reason, I don't even go back myself to listen to that material and slow it down because it's so abrasive. And I guess I actually don't need dry ice that badly for most of the time. Luckily, that library costed about £100 to make, and I think I priced it at £40. And looking back, I think I should probably like take down the price because yes, it costed me a lot of energy and annoyance to have to go through the edits because I thought it'd be fun to make that kind of library, and trust me, it wasn't compared to a lot of others. But I think it was, like, weirdly, it makes sense to reinforce the point about pricing libraries that way, because I think I priced it probably too high for what it gave. I priced it that high because I didn't particularly enjoy working with the sounds, and it still took me a long time, which is not the right way to price a library. So since then, instead of trying to fix it by saying, you know, lower the price, I figured, no, just get libraries that are fun to work with, as in make libraries that you have a blast making, because if, you know, like if you lower the price and you just try to do things that you can wrap up within a day with £100, then you're going to make material that I'm not saying anyone could do, but I guess
inferior.
inferior in general, I guess, but it's just you're not investing, you're not showing your dedication, and it's a weird conversation, I guess. But if you have it in you to spend money and to travel and to do these things, then while you're doing them, you realize how much passion there is in you for what you do. And instead, if you corner yourself into what is financially safe, what will definitely give me the money back, etc., might lead you to a library like Ultrasonic Dry Ice, and that feels a little bit strange and backwards. So since then, the approach for pricing was pretty much invest a ton and make it, I'm gonna say, a bit pricey, I guess, because the latest libraries are not exactly cheap. But I guess I'm trying to make it so that I can invest more and more in the new ones. And yeah, it's a bit of a strange conversation because I'm not much of a marketing person, and I have been going with the same numbers for the recent libraries just for the sake of consistency, more so than sitting down and thinking how many hours did I know that there's a plugin, for example, in that you can get in Reaper that logs how much time you spend with the DAW open. Anyone that is a little bit more experienced than me would probably do that and does that. I know of many colleagues that work in a field recording doing this. It's not the way that I approach it normally. I just kind of try to get a feel for the size in gigs and the type of content that it has and what I think is the worth of the library, and then I just try to go for that number. I think in the past I would always undersell them, and at present I feel a little bit better about how it's going, because when I raised my prices for the animal hyperrealism libraries, I thought I was taking quite a risk because A, I never did libraries that featured animals, and B, that was quite expensive, but the response was the opposite. So there must be something in there as well, and I'm not sure what kind of lesson it is, but that library I worked on so hard to try and make as good as possible, and I've decided to pretty much cut all the complications that thinking about this might bring up, and just tell myself, if you work hard and you have video footage to show how hard you worked, and your sounds, deliver on that as well, and in the first place, then it will work out. Right. That's kind of it's a very simple way to look at it, but every time that I tried to look at it from any other perspective, it didn't work for me. So I need to just find topics that I'm okay to work with for a long time and that I enjoy, and that kind of helps. And then the price can be fair because I'm actually giving something that I'm proud of, if it makes sense.
Right.
I guess as you release new libraries, your reputation also develops, and you can take more of a risk because people get to know you and they know that you're going to be delivering a consistently quality library. So I guess that gives you leverage to put your price up a little bit, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. It's strange because you never really know where you sit, to be honest. As in, I know what I call big names, and I'm not really sure whether they know me. Yeah, it's just very strange to say, I think people are ready to, pay big bucks, boom bucks for my libraries. And you're like, well,
that's really
I don't
nice.
really know. I know that if you work with sound to any degree and someone tells you boom, you know what that is. Yeah. And it doesn't go the same way, especially with my surname. But I guess, the point being is it's a tricky thing to evaluate. And yes, the products should speak for themselves, but this is the same thing as recording with your band when you're 20 and you might have the best band ever, but if you're in a vacuum and nobody around you is interested, then nobody is ever going to know about it. So it's tricky because you want to keep a position in the market that feels still accessible, as in something that people can go, I can give this a try, and at the same time you don't really know your worth in that sense. And I don't think it matters that much, to be honest, but as in it doesn't, because at the moment things are going well enough for me and I have a full-time job before my library work. So again, you're speaking with someone that luckily can afford to, if need be, drop this tomorrow, but luckily it's not the case, and I can keep at it for as long as I'm passionate about it, which I think will be a long time. But
we have a last question because we're kind of like hit the 1 hour mark.
I've given very brief answers.
No, it's very, very valuable information. Like, thanks a lot. It's really good stuff.
Of course. Yeah.
I was curious about it's like kind of like an outside topic, but you worked on the latest Star Wars game. Also, you worked on some Gears of War stuff. How does it feel to work on games that are like established franchises and they already have like these unique sound effects embedded on them? How does it feel to like come into a big project like that, try to be creative but also follow the legacy at the same time? Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
What's your experience with that?
I think it's my favorite thing now. The opposite of that for me is someone asking you, can you make an amazing sound? And nothing more. And then you go in your DAW and you're like, you know what? A gunshot. Yeah. It's going to be a gunshot. Yeah. And you get halfway and you think, it's a normal one though. Should it be sci-fi? Yeah, I feel like it should be sci-fi. And with a lot of games that I never had the chance to work on, I guess, an original IP, like with no precedent whatsoever. And I'm sure that it would be so cool. And, like that would be the best, probably the best thing. But so far, the best thing that I had was to work on a franchise that existed and was huge, and partly was huge because of sound. And in a way, it's kind of nice because at the beginning, you'll go through this wall of everything that has been done before. So why you shouldn't use this technique and why you shouldn't do that thing, etc. A lot of kind of no. But after that, you're left with something that, as you enter this domain of what is known and what the sound is for this franchise or universe, you would look around and you think about all the things that you might have wanted to try but you shouldn't because they're not part of it. The second that you give yourself enough time to become familiar with the environment, you realize that there is so much that still hasn't been done within it. And that you lok at maybe the seismic charge sound on one side and a starfighter laser on the other, and maybe they are miles apart and there's nothing really that fits in the middle, as in there's gotta be a new sound that still fits in the universe of Star Wars, still feels cool, still fits aesthetically, and still is weird enough to be in Star Wars, because most of the sounds that I really, really like in Star Wars are sounds that should be out of place but aren't. And it's there. As in, you can see that weirder has been done and different has been done as well in a like sideways. So it's good to be working on projects like those, because after a while that you realize that there's just a lot of opportunities. And yes, you will have the eventual call back to, okay, this is way too far from from what you needed to do because of the era or because of whatever else. Like, for example, on Gears of War, at one point, I think on the remaster of the first one, we had to pull back the headshot sound that we wanted to rework, because the first one had a very specific functionality to it, as in it was like a watermelon exploding type of thing, and you want that to an extent. But a lot of other sounds, like, I didn't make the sound, but I think Steve Wetman made the sound for the Gears of War Ultimate Edition, but the Hammer of Dawn coming down is something that it was iconic in the original, and it still was in the remaster, but it was completely different, yet it was respectful to the franchise. It's a thin line to walk, but when you have enough experience, and which I necessarily didn't have at the time but might start to have now, as in thinking back to Gears, it's satisfying to walk that line and to be able to tell your peers, we got this, we know what we're doing, etc. Again, like the help that we gave with the Fallen Order wasn't massive. We worked on it for the last 3 or 4 months before the project shipped, although we did get great opportunities to contribute with the team at Criterion. But it was just enough to remind you how cool it is to really work with something that is a legacy in sound design.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's from us.
Yeah, that kind of covers all.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think
All right.
for the end, we can just also thank Asbjoern for creating a sound effect and giving independent sound recorders to a platform to just give out to the community and let them be compensated for it.
This episode we were joined by Mattia, and we talked about sound library production and his experiences about field recording. My name is Can Sarac.
My name is Güneş Uyanık again.
Yes, see you in the next episode.
Yeah, see ya.
Bye bye.